Hello, listeners. Just a quick note to tell you that my book is finished and due to be released soon. The title, Shtick to Business, What the Masters of Comedy Can Teach You About Breaking Rules, Being Fearless, and Building a Serious Career. In it, I give you some serious business lessons from the world's funniest people. It's a lot of fun, and I think you'll find it useful for your professional lives. Look for it listed on my Amazon page. If it's not up right now, it will be there soon. Let's get started.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Jessie David Fox. Jessie's a writer who works at New York Magazine, first as a blogger and then a comedy columnist for New York Magazine's pop culture site, Vulture.com. In 2017, Jessie launched his podcast, Good One, a podcast about jokes, in which, not surprisingly, a comedian comes on and discusses one of his or her jokes. Welcome, Jessie.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
So before I get into this, I have to say, I feel this weird sense of pressure.
Why?
Interviewing another podcaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I won't be judging your questions. I mean, I mostly be thinking about my ability as an interview guest. I think there's a reason why I interview people, and specifically interview people, not like have people on to have conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think of my podcast as a conversation. Like, it is an investigation using the person to like explore themselves.
Okay.
So like, I try to talk as little as possible. So anytime I'm forced to do this, I'm like, I want to be entertaining, and I feel pressure. So don't worry about, you should not feel pressure.
We're even.
Yeah, we're even, I think.
Perfect. So Jessie, if you weren't working as a writer or podcaster, what would you be doing? By the way, this is the most interview question of everything we'll talk about.
I was thinking about that because I know you do ask that of people. And I mean, the truth is, and I've thought about this actually a lot, because writing about comedy or writing in general was not like my first plan. It was sort of, I wouldn't say it was a backup plan. It was just a thing that I came to later in life. And so I first tried to work in the entertainment industry. Mm-hmm. So I lived in LA. It was about 10 years ago. I worked at William Morris, and I was very bad at it. I was sort of like bad at all portions of the job, which were filing was bad at, and answering the phone and talking on the phone I was bad at. And I was sort of bad at like being businessy in general. And eventually I was let go. And
congratulations.
I know. And it was very nice. The person who had asked me to move to LA for this job, he was just like, you gotta get out of here. And I tell the story so much that I tell the story so much I don't know if it's true, but I think it's true. Which he goes, you're too sensitive to work here and too much of an intellectual to live in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So I moved to San Francisco and worked in the food industry. I ran marketing for a few restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I had no experience in food really or marketing, I just sort of like, they were looking for an entry-level person who like kind of understood the food scenes. And I did. In that year, I lived in San Francisco, which I described as the only time I was ever young, because I just sort of wasn't sure what I was going to do. I made, this is going to answer your question, I promise. I made a New Year's resolution that I'm either going to learn French or become a writer. So I had been writing a blog for a while, kind of just for fun, not thinking that would be my career, because I never thought anyone could make a career writing about anything. Because I was never really...
It's a healthy perspective as a writer.
Yeah, I was a bad writer in high school. It was like not really my thing. And then I sort of was able to figure out certain things. And then, so I was either going to learn French or going to pitch places and write for other places. And the idea was I was either going to make one last go at like trying to pursue a dream career or a career where my work is my life or whatever, or I was going to like truly do the opposite and like just move to a place I want to live and try to like make a go at just like being a person who it's like your life is first, and then like whatever you find something to make.
It's the live to work or work to live conundrum.
Yeah, and I was always like, work is really important. Like, you do what you do, and you don't work a day in your life or whatever. I mean, and so if I didn't, so then it's really like a question, right? So it's like, if I didn't get success writing, then I would have moved to France. So I think, so then I think about what I would be doing, and I think I'd be working in natural wine distribution. I don't know why. I just sort of think like I'd move to France and I would try to work in food, and sort of that was like around the time where that decision was happening, about 2008, 2009, was when natural wine was really on the rise in France. It had not really caught here in the same way.
Can I ask what's natural wine?
Sure. So the most basic, it's sort of like there's no real one rule, but it's essentially wine made with as little
technology.
Yeah, it's not even technology. It's like the little chemicals, or all the sort of stuff that like can go into the wine process. Like the thing that's most thought of is like sulfur. Often you'll use sulfur to sort of like streamline things and make it so it's a little bit more controlled of an environment. But it's not like all natural wines don't have sulfur. It's just usually less. It's less interaction. The sort of how they farm is different. How they bottle is different. It's a lot more natural macerations and stuff like that.
I see.
And it's a thing that's been going on for, millennia, obviously. And
I think wine started out as natural wine.
Yeah, and then people figured out processes pretty early on. And certain countries like Georgia have always been doing it this way. So now they're like, Georgia has become a much more popular tourist destination because of this.
Oh, fascinating.
This wine processes they have. Nonetheless, I think, one, I sort of was always interested in food and wine and stuff, but I think have been good at noticing trends and being like, oh, I should work in that trend, which was partly how I got into comedy, which was like, I moved to LA in 2008, maybe 2008, and a friend took me to see Comedy Death Ray when it was a live show. I had gone to see in high school. I'd see comedy a lot. I would go to the Comedy Cellar. I used a fake ID and I would get into the Comedy Cellar, and then, but then I kind of fell out of it. This is telling us so much of the biography. I hope I'm not ruining the question. See, this is me being neurotic about being an interview guest. Nonetheless,
we were so for the audience, we were chatting about
the pressure of being, when you're an interviewer, being a guest. You don't want to interview yourself, but it's very hard.
You're just worried you're being judged more than you would normally be. Yeah. You're not being judged.
Very cool. So I would go to the Comedy Cellar as a kid, and then I kind of had a falling out because I just sort of got tired of the comedians that I would see.
I could see that.
You just see them doing the same material, and you're like, oh, this is not exciting anymore. And then I went to Comedy Death Ray, and I would see people I've never heard of, and these are people that before they broke. So the first day I saw Hannibal Buress, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then the next week I saw
And he's younger, he's fresh, it's a different perspective, a different style. It's not the same old.
Yeah, I saw nothing like it. It's also like, he was closer to my generation. He's doing jokes that made sense to me and his reference points, and then I saw Kyle Kinane the next week, and I couldn't believe how funny this was. And then I would go to Comedy Death Ray specifically 3 or 4 times a month. And that's when I got familiar with all the people now are the people. But so all of this to say is like, that's when I got into comedy again. And I think I've always been pretty good at going like, what are the things that are happening? So I think if I moved to Paris, I would have been like, figured it out, worked at try to work at a cooler restaurant, maybe, I guess. I don't know how. I didn't speak French well enough. And then I would get into that.
And the French are they love hiring Americans.
Well, it was a time where Brooklyn was being fetishized. Especially.
I see.
So it had that going for me. So I'd like be like, oh, I know what like Brooklyn restaurants are like. Yeah. And I would maybe use that to kind of get somewhere, and then
the fetishization of Brooklyn.
Yeah. So then 10 years later, I probably would have moved back, but at this point worked in the sort of distribution of.
I see. Okay.
So that answers your question. Like I really was like, what is my life if I didn't find writing? Which is like, this is what I do, and like, or like it really fits, but I was like, well, if it didn't work out, I guess, doesn't work out for so many people.
Indeed.
It really is like amazing that I was able to find. It was that I wrote about a thing at a time where people wanted to read about it.
I think this idea, it sounds like you have good instincts in the sense that you kind of pay attention to what's going on and so on. That said, there is this notion of luck.
Yes.
That, I teach MBA students, and I give them I think it's the Spanx Sarah Blakely episode of How I Built This. And that, I mean, what brilliant idea. She's crazy smart and hardworking and high EQ and the whole package as an entrepreneur. And yet it's not clear Spanx gets made if one of the producers at dinner asks his daughters, so what do you think about this thing? And they're like, oh my God, Dad, you need to do this. Right. So he doesn't bring it up at dinner. The daughters aren't there that night. Who knows the trajectory and how it changes?
I always say that, like, in my earlier life, I worked with people who were entrepreneurial and were failed. And then I met people who are entrepreneurial and were successful. And they're exact same
people.
Yeah, there's a delusion they both need. Just you have to hope you're correct.
Yes.
And you don't know you're going to be. You think you're going to be correct. That's why you do it. But you have to hope. It's really like, I tell people all the time how lucky I was. It's like, yeah, but you're talented. I was like, talent is like, you have what you do, and talent means that there are other people that respond to that. Yes. Right. So it's like, I wrote in a way at a time in which enough people liked it that I was able to get a career doing it.
Yes.
It was the type of way I wrote, the sort of nature of how I was funny or not funny, the nature of my analysis, all that stuff that were all perfectly timed for the exact window in which I became a writer is also, up and coming journalists might like, how do I do it? I'm like, all I can tell you is get a time machine, go to 2009, and that's when there's going to be the blogs I can tell you to pitch to. Where if you can pitch something and are willing to write for free, they'll give you one shot, right? And they had medium sized traffic, but were read by bigger sites. So like I wrote for this website called Juicy.com, JUWCY. It's a Jewish pop culture site. And it was just a place that I saw existed. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine. The air conditioning just popped on here.
And so like that probably got 500,000 uniques or something a month, which is not big, but it's enough where it's like,
for them, they notice.
Yeah, it's noticeable. And then it's like, so that's like a small, medium-sized blog. And then I was able to like kind of use that to be like, I'm around. I was able to pitch Splitsider, which was probably getting maybe 1 million. Who knows if these numbers are correct, which is now a medium-sized blog that are happy to have people write for free. And so then that's how I was able to do it. And I was able to keep on doing different things and got noticed, right? So how I got noticed was not from writing essays or really writing at all, which was I did funny graphs. It really is like, I had to do a thing where I started making graphs seriously, where I wrote a post about, I counted the amount of jokes in multiple episodes of certain sitcoms or whatever, and then I found a website where you can make graphs online. It's a .edu, so I think it's for kids to learn how to make graphs. And then someone assigned me to do graphs. Juicy assigned me to do graphs because Tablet was doing the 100 greatest Jewish films or something. It's like, do a graph of this. So I spent weeks doing 2 serious graphs. And I was like, well, this is not a story. I guess I'll do 8 funny graphs. And then people really like those funny graphs. Splitsider, I was like, asked me to recap 30 Rock and was like, oh, maybe you should do those graphs. So I did that.
You became the graph guy.
Yeah, really quick. And then so Vulture saw one of those recaps and was like, do you want to do graphs for Vulture? And that was really like, that's it. That's like how I got my job at Vulture, was like, there are graphs that were so, I didn't know this, which was New York Magazine at the time was ran by this guy, Adam Moss, who was a pretty legendary editor-in-chief, and he'd been there for a while. And his contribution to the sort of magazine lexicon was visual storytelling and graphs. But I didn't know that I was essentially like doing the next evolution of a thing that he was doing. So that's how I did the Grammys and Oscars in graphs. The Oscars one was really, really popular. And I had some blogging experience, and I was able to get a job as a blogger. Like, no one valued my opinion for like my first like 2 years of being a journalist. And then I started writing about comedy. But the point was the luck, which is like that I found it was a pretty, quick to me trajectory. It was like probably 2 years of writing for free as a second job. I had a full-time job the entire time. I've never believed really in that idea that you have to really quit and make it so you have to succeed. So I sort of like, I've always had a full-time job. I've always had health insurance.
So I want to follow up on a few things.
Sure.
So let's get this last thing about this.
Yeah.
I'm working on a new book. It's serious business lessons from the masters of comedy.
Yeah.
So what can we learn from these, the folks who come into your studio week in and week out, they're, lack of a better term, misfits oftentimes. And yet they're successful in this incredibly difficult endeavor.
Yeah.
And it's not just that they're smart and naturally funny. Like they have practices, perspectives, I'm sure some of which you've uncovered.
Yeah.
I think those practices and perspectives can translate into other worlds, creativity and innovation, teamwork, leadership, career development, etc. So one of those lessons that I fussed around with early on in the project, by the way, the book's coming out early next year.
Sure.
So one of the ideas that I fussed around, and I never wrote about it, is this idea of no plan B.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of comics like that.
Yes.
Because, and no plan B goes something like this. I put myself in a situation where I couldn't afford to fail.
Yeah.
If I failed, I was dead. If I failed, I was homeless.
Yes.
If I failed.
Yeah. I remember Eugene Merman told Max Silvestri how to do it. He had to quit his job if he was going to really be a comedian.
Yes.
And he did, and then it worked. I don't know. You don't hear the stories at the times it doesn't.
Of course. Yeah. That's the problem. There's a survivor bias.
Yeah.
So the alternative to this is like the 10% entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So you've got your day job and you have the side hustle, and it's a little bit of a passion project. And you spend some nights, you spend some weekends, you spend some lunch hours.
Yeah.
And you work on this thing, not exactly knowing, and it's slower. You don't develop as quickly and so on. However, you're never dead.
Yeah.
You're never homeless. Right? No one ever has to do a GoFundMe because you broke your ankle.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. The reason I couldn't settle on it is because I don't think that there's a right answer.
Yeah.
I think that they both work. And it probably depends a little bit on the person and their risk tolerance. And it probably depends a lot on kind of this notion of luck.
Yeah. And I mean, tremendously on privilege in so much that like people are able to take risks if they're actually not that much of a risk. I mean, like, I think of the person, probably the most prominent person who didn't do this is Maria Bamford.
Okay.
Maria Bamford, I believe, didn't quit her day job until maybe after she had an hour. Like she was like really, until she had to, couldn't. Because like for her, and like privilege beyond just sort of like wealth, we're talking about like Maria Bamford could not risk not having health insurance because she needs to have access to certain medical care. I'm not like speaking out of school. She famously talks about her mental illness. Like she can't do that, right? And she's always been financially conservative of like making sure she's safe. And as a result, her career trajectory was slower, and also her career trajectory is because she's a bizarre thing, and she's a woman, and people didn't know how to all these things. She fits in no box. But she didn't fall into that trap of like, just go for it. That's when you'll really make it. Like, I think the idea of making it is so silly because there are only so many people who make it in a way that is 100% exactly what they want to do. Like, truly, like, you can say you made it, which is like you're able to sustain yourself by being a comedian. But there's many different versions of that, and not all of them are actually better than the life you had beforehand, right? So it's like, let's say a person was given the advice, let's say Max Silvestri, because I know, was given the advice by Eugene Merman, you have to quit if you really want to do it or whatever. And let's say he didn't. So instead he was one of the better comedians in New York at the time, and he remained that, and he like would get some work here and there. Like, it's possible that he just would sort of, maybe he would not become a touring comedian in the same way. But instead of getting a job, which he currently has as a writer on Big Mouth, she would focus on development, essentially, which is an option for people, which is you don't have to be staffed on a show. You're allowed to be like, I'm going to just work on my own thing and hopefully sell it. But if I have a good enough job right now, it's not a rush and I still get to create it. I mean, it's also... And then maybe he sold some show, and then that's his entire life, and then that's also good.
Yes.
I mean, like, certain people like the danger of it, and I think a lot of comedians are people who like those extremes. But that's also because that part of comedy is that the bad boy part of it is the narrative we hear more often because it's a better narrative to hear.
It's a good story. It's like the no one tells stories about the well-adjusted comedian, right? So what gets reported is what's interesting.
Yes.
And that's a fun, sexy story. No one wants to write the story about the comedian who, worked at Walmart 40 hours a week.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's why all the UCB stuff it's many complicated things. But like, if you look at UCB or all the improv theaters, if you look at them in terms of not how other comedians make it, but like just how other people make it in other careers, which is like, you pay it to have a path that you could take where you like get better at each level and it's deliberate and you can take classes. It is how a lot of actors make it.
Yes.
Like, it's not like actors get to do there isn't stand up for actors.
Yeah.
So
you take classes.
Like it is because comedy has this romanticism around like you just do it and you're this lone person. And I think that
this is stand up.
I think that sort of, which is a very, that ego that a stand up has, that I think is part and parcel of a certain idea of what stand-up is toxic and not good and eliminates people that could be interesting comedians. And I do think it makes it so they're like, comedy is one thing and you have to grind it out and you have to be good in every room and blah, blah, blah. And all of that is stupid. They're rules that were created by road dogs in the 80s who are failures who then bullied successful people into thinking this is what it means to be a true comedian out of guilt, right? It's like, well, you're going to be famous, but as a result, you have to like abide by my rules.
Yeah.
And I think it's so stupid that we listen, because a lot of those rules are like women aren't funny or like, shit like that become rules to a segment of the comedy audience that is so wrong, like what truth in comedy is, or like, oh, you have to be honest all the time, like all this stuff.
It's none of the. Yeah, I agree with you. Like someone who studies this stuff, anytime there's a rule, I'm just like, well, it works some of the time, sure, but the idea that you have to be truthful in comedy is crazy because.
But it's crazy. Like, it's crazy because we define truth as one thing.
Yes,
right. We're saying when they say truth in comedy, for these people that are like, oh, you got to be honest up there. What they mean is you have to like tell things about your personal life and or you have to tell the truths of society. And it's like, I did air quotes, if you're going to tell from my tone. And those truths. So, and I think both those things in the last 5 years has, I wouldn't say come under attack, but there are things to look about, which is like the comedian most associated with being truthful over the last 10 years recently was uncovered for being the biggest liar. Like literally, like Louis C.K. was like, I'm honest up there. I'm giving you the raw. You're learning everything about me. And then he had this huge lie that he would not talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, oh, so truth is actually it's a controlled thing.
It's an interesting.
It's not being vulnerable.
It's an interesting counterfactual to think, because I don't know about you, but I mean, I'm tangentially connected to the comedy community. So I talk to people. I spend some time in green rooms. I have comedian friends. And the Louis C.K. stuff was a well-known secret kind of thing. And I just wonder if Louis had just said, as part of his bit, like, and was truthful and vulnerable, be like, you know what? I've got some stuff that I'm not happy about. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I've done some things kind of thing. How much, in this world, maybe it doesn't matter. But
I mean, if he admitted it 10 years ago, it would not have come out, right? Things being uncovered.
Yeah, it feels.
I mean, the cover up is like, it's right. There's like the cover up is worse than the crime or whatever, right? It's like ultimately, like, right. The sort of culture of not only did he do these things was like, and that like hypothetically were industry used to silence these people, and that speculation makes it seem worse. I mean, like, if he was truthful now about it and thoughtful and considerate in his stand-up, he would be able to be in a better situation where he is in terms of the pop culture. Like, some people would never forgive him, but I think a lot of people were hoping he would come back and be interesting, thoughtful, whatever.
Yeah.
So when he came back, and seemingly was the opposite.
He also came back too soon.
He broke a lot of people's hearts. A lot of people, men and women that I knew in comedy, were just like, I had an opportunity to help shape how we move on through these things. And instead, he signifies like it's a war. It's like there's these people out to get you.
Yeah.
And it sucks. It really is I thought what he did was wrong, obviously, but I held out hope that like he can maybe not about redemption, but like he's a skilled person and he hypothetically could talk about a subject that's very complicated to talk about.
Oh, yeah, look, I mean, that's what he does. That's one of the things that he does better than most any other comedian on the planet, is take something you ought not to be able to talk well about and find a way to talk well about it.
And he decided not to. And he's so good that he knows what he's doing. So if you hear what he's doing and you're like, oh, this seems cynical or dark, or like, why are these the targets that he's coming back to do? It's like he knows what he's doing. He's like, it felt like who's left of my audience? The people who didn't care what I did. I'm going to be their favorite comedian. And there's enough of those people that he can have a career doing it. But
I mean, let's be honest. Louis doesn't need the money.
Yeah.
So it is truly up to him in terms of like. Yeah. So this is not an issue of survival, right? Like the man, made millions of dollars. Yeah. In some ways, what you're getting, I'm actually surprised that when people get that wealthy, we don't see more of who they really are. Mm-hmm. Like it's why I've always enjoyed Kanye. Yeah. Like to me, Kanye, I think the man has some mental troubles, and I feel bad for that, but I've always liked him because, I mean, besides liking his music and as an artist and so on, it's, obviously he's brought me great joy as a listener of music, but man, I love the fact that guy gives zero fucks. Yeah. And I'm sort of surprised that more people don't. Yeah. Once they reach a level of fame and fortune where like the system seems to keep them behaving well. And you think about it, like, that guy's like, he's like, he probably sits here and goes like some of these, I never should be here. I should be dead. I should be this. I should be that. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I'm gonna enjoy this ride. Yeah, and I don't need it anymore. You know? Being in LA, I always think about how there's these industries of people to protect people from not doing things wrong. And wrong might be, but it might be right to that person. Yeah, or just things that would make the road of being a famous person more complicated, or just. And you could be a complicated famous person. It's just sort of a bumpier road, and a publicist intentionally is like, my job is to smooth your road, and if your thing is like you're like a messy person, to use the slang of the day, and it's like, but let's control it, right? It's like, go on Letterman and like tell stories about pooping or whatever. Don't get pictures of you like falling down drunk or whatever. Yes. Like, it's because like ultimately the thing that most really famous people we like is like they are motivated to create things. Indeed. And so to maintain your fame allows you more ability to decide what you want to do. So you have to sacrifice these other parts of yourself. And so you'd have to be a mix of kind of not be at the disposal of the industry at large, right? So that's why stand-ups have the ability to be more, to turn more people off, because they're like, well, I sell out Madison Square Garden by myself. So if you don't like this joke, it actually doesn't matter to me. However, it so clearly does, because they are so sensitive. Yeah. Because everything, what happens is you've all, as a comic, or any other public figure, the love is always clear. Yeah. Right? You always get the love, right? You get it in box office returns. You get it in laughter and applause breaks. The thing that has changed is that now the hate also reaches you. Yes. And you didn't get the hate before. Yeah. And so I think that
it's very weird for people to see it. The funniest thing of the great irony of all of the last month or whatever being a person who is in the world of comedy is Kevin Hart is legitimately the most pro-political correctness and most articulate about this change comedian out there.
Okay. And
he is constantly used as this example of like this bad boy who we have to like get rid of, or it's actually incredible how, because people remove, they only have so much of an understanding of a person because they see certain clips or whatever. They're like, he is peculiar as a famous person is, but he was talking about that. Someone on the episode of like that haircut show or whatever that show is that he was on, that people got mad at him for, I guess, being incredulous towards Lil Nas X. Someone asked him about like, oh, is it harder to be a comedian now? Because people are so sensitive or whatever. And he's like, we're just adjusting to the fact that we can now hear people who don't like our stuff.
That's right.
Forever, people have not liked our stuff.
That's right.
We just never knew it.
That's right.
Like, you would hear these stories of letters going to TV networks. I'd hear my entire life, this got this complaint. The thing is, no one read those letters. But now there are tweets. And for certain celebrities, they're like, I got famous so I didn't have to hear people's opinion. Yeah. So it's like, well, get off Twitter. Like, you can't have it both. You can't, like, be around people. That's like, it is like, you can't be in a situation that you're on there for praise if you don't want. You can get away from both. But if you want either, you have to have both.
Yeah, I think what's happened is, first of all, okay, so as an aside, I ran into a comedian here in town the other day. It's funny because I'm not going to say who it is just because he may not want me to say what he said. I was actually at Tender Greens and I was going to, Sweet Greens, and I was picking up a salad that I had ordered mobile, and his was next to mine. Got it. So I texted him. I'm like, are you craving salad right now? And he walks in and we're chatting. We're chatting about this very idea. And my first thing is like, first of all, I think this stuff is generally a healthy conversation to have. Although there are times where I'm just like, these comedians really aren't the problem.
Sure.
Right. There are truly evil people in the eyes of the critics. That is the masses.
Yes.
And he goes, yeah, but that would be hard to do.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of the easy thing is to critique Kevin Hart.
I think it's sure.
Yeah. So the idea, I think, is that if you're going to be a comic these days, especially if you're going to be a famous comic who became famous. So as an aside, I'll get back to this. So for this project, I've been reading a lot of books. I read the book about the improv by Bud Friedman. What's really fascinating is like all the comics that we know, these sort of middle-aged plus comics, the Jerry Seinfelds and the Richard Lewises and so on. It's like there wasn't much competition back in the day. Like the people who we know are famous were the Robert Townsends and the Eddie Murphys and
Roseanne,
so on. Roseanne and all these people. They all knew each other. They all worked out of a small number of clubs.
Yeah.
It was competitive and it was professional and the standards were high. Like, when we were talking about career management stuff, if someone said to me, I want to be a stand-up comic right now, I'd be like, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because it's good for comedy that the funnel is so big that thousands of people are trying to do this. But I'm like, if you want to do comedy, by all means, there's plenty of opportunity still. But I'm not sure you should be a stand-up comic.
Well, if you can do it, if you have to do it, I'm sorry. Like, it's a story I tell, which I just tried stand-up once, not because I felt like I needed to. I just like sort of wanted to, and I had a friend who was like, just do it. You have these jokes or whatever. And I told one joke, and it sort of got a decent enough laugh, and I had a thought of like, that was fine.
Yeah. And by the way, it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. It was a relief to not be like, oh, I need this all the time. And I've said this, and not to prove that I'm less needy than comedians. It's sort of like this doesn't feed my neediness as I know it does. Like a lot of comedians, I say the best comedians are talented, they have vision, and they have this incredible need that made them do it over and over again.
Right.
But like the funniest people, and they were the funniest people before they started trying. But to be a comedian does not mean you're the funniest person. It means you have the need to keep on doing it.
To grind it out and learn how to do this.
And because you'll see a lot of comedians of a certain level who will do the job well and will never break out that level because they're ultimately not that funny. And they don't have vision. But they do have the need to do stand-up, and they do it. But you can tell they don't have vision. And you can tell that they have no idea of what they wanted. They knew they liked doing it, and they knew they wanted to be funny, and they wanted people to laugh. But they did not go into it being like, this is an art that I want to create something with for a reason.
Yeah.
You can see incredibly famous people who you can also see that with, who don't have a vision, but they're so funny and they're so good at it that doesn't matter.
Yes.
But like the best people, the people we truly remember, you can tell there's a difference. You can my whole thing is that I'm trying to reward the people with vision who do things for a reason, to explain what that is.
So these are the people you target for your podcast.
What I target for the podcast is people that sometimes it's people that I know that have an interesting process, but more often than not, it's not about like who I like or don't like. It's about people who I feel like have a vision for the work that they're doing, and no one asks them about it because people don't think of comedians that way.
Yes.
And I've been thinking about this recently, and comedy compared to other art forms has a literacy problem. That people don't know what makes comedy good or bad beyond they like it.
Yes.
And that includes some comedians. That comedians don't know, like they kind of get into it because they like being up all night, or they like their friends, or they like saying stuff or whatever.
And they don't fit anywhere else.
Yeah.
So they don't, the lack of boundaries and so
you
on.
see them lumping in bad comedians with good comedians. And it's been very frustrating. Because
are you willing to name names?
Yeah, sure. No, I'm not. So it's like so. In the last few months, we've had a few things happen, which is like Dave Chappelle released a special, Bill Burr released a special, and the Shane Gillis stuff happened.
Yes.
So
this is going to
come
launch later, but people will be familiar with all of this stuff.
These are three big things that happened in comedy.
Right. In very short time period.
And it's been a very frustrating month in the world of watching comedy. Yeah. Because
which, as an aside, most people don't give a shit about.
Yeah, sure.
It's so interesting. It's like everything gets amplified. Like my Twitter feed is filled up with this stuff. Why?
Yeah.
Because I follow a bunch of comedians and people who talk about comedy and care about comedy. And the thing about what's frustrating is these stories, because they overlap with different stories about political correctness writ large, become interesting to, how would I describe these sites? Every publications who don't actually give a shit about comedy, who just use it as a means to communicate certain things. And my thing is that people only think about comedy based on what people say and not how people say it. So when they say something good, right, they're able to like speak truth to power. We use that joke as a way to communicate gun violence is bad. We pass Jim Jeffries' joke around or whatever. But the same way is like we use their political incorrectness as a way to essentially like talk about Trump or whatever, and get that same rage. They're just like, let's use that people are mad about this stuff who don't care about comedy to get clicks on stories about comedy. Yeah, it has nothing to do with the fact that they care about these comedians. But so in this narrative that no one actually cares about in terms of how I care about it, which is the art of stand-up comedy, you had Dave Chappelle put out this special that had, let's say offensive is a genre of comedy. It was a lot of offensive comedy. You can be offensive in good or whatever, but like the offensive style of comedy, you ran through a list of things that people find are sensitive and you talk about them. Yes,
I think it's really lame generally to do that, but you can do it well. But I do think it's lame because it's not self-inspired. It literally is based on what you know people will be mad about or shocked about. You're exploiting shock to raise the tension up so that you can have a punchline. It's not naturally creating the tension in a way that I think is more interesting. To talk about benign violation or whatever, you're like, let's talk about a violation.
Let's pick the most outrageous
violations.
things.
Is cheap. I mean, like, I know that's like, in some ways you're like, that's what a comedian's supposed to do or whatever. But like, if you're just picking things that you know if you just talk about a taboo subject in front of people, you are essentially just doing it, right? You're just doing, it's like, I'm safe, you're safe because we're talking, you trust me. I'm just going to talk about an unsafe thing. And then you're going to be like, that's funny but it's too on the nose of what your theory is. I'm like, have a more complicated violation, have a more complicated way of it being benign, and push how it is benign or not benign.
That's the art form.
Yeah.
To me, I agree with you. It's the issue with this is you put an F-bomb into your joke because it turns the volume up. You know what I mean? It enhances. It's a cheap way to create a violation.
I mean, in the most basic, it is a violation for grown-ups to curse or whatever, and like, oh, it's fine, right? It's like all of it. So I thought Chappelle's special was really poorly done. I thought it was one of the most lazily released, one of the most poorly constructed stand-up specials that's ever been released. I love Dave Chappelle. Some of my most seminal moments of understanding comedy have been seeing Dave Chappelle.
Yes.
But because Dave Chappelle is Dave Chappelle, he's allowed to release things when they're not ready. And we don't usually see that. We don't usually see comedians release things where you're like, wait, that doesn't really connect back. And like, this punchline is not surprising. It's like A to, instead of going A to B or A to C, it's just sort of like A, and then he just like says a random thing.
Yeah.
And so that happened, and people wrote negative reviews about it.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't write any, but I talked to the person who wrote the review and talked to, which was, this was bad at it. It's not bad to talk about these subjects necessarily, but this was bad, and you're allowed to say it's bad just because. It's almost like the opposite, which is like, there's one side being like, you can't say about anything. And there's the other side that's like, you have to be able to say everything no matter what. You're a comedian. You can't be criticized.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so this existed. And I was like, this is bad. It is offensive to comedians that he puts us out and people are arguing it's good.
Okay.
So that's point one.
Okay. Wait, hold on.
Sure.
That's the thing. So to go back to one of the ideas that I didn't get to finish is that I feel that we just have to treat the comedian with a different model than we used to. So we used to treat them the way you would treat a musician.
Yeah.
And we should treat them as we treat politicians.
Sure.
Right? So politicians never complain that the other side hates them.
Mm-hmm.
They just ignore it. You know what I mean? It's just the nature of politics to have a bit of this adversarial kind of relationship where some people love you and some people hate you. And if you try to make everyone love you, no one will want you, kind of thing. And so I just feel that the comedy stuff is more like politics these days. I mean, even independent of whether you're talking about political topics or not. It's just the style of segmentation is that you just can't make everyone laugh. I
mean, but I think that's true of any art form. We just sort of like,
but
we don't hear the hate because I think because political correctness is also a thing that's been co-opted by politics. But I think ultimately, like, there's hate for musicians. It's just sort of, to me, it's like, I think there's a job both sides have to do of being like, these critiques are about what you're saying, but ultimately it's like, they're saying, it's the same thing as a bunch of people being like, I don't like this painting or whatever. Yeah. And you're just hearing it. And it's a different version of that, but they're just saying like, I don't like your art. And that is hurtful to hear.
It is. The difference though, of course, is that like, usually when someone doesn't like your painting, it's not that they find it disgusting.
Sure.
Right. So because of,
it's hard because it's you, right? Yeah. You are doing it. You're talking, you're using your name and you're saying it's not a character, right? People will complain about certain movies or books being this or that, but like ultimately the creator of it is separated and it's a harder, it's still, the fact that it's a comedian saying it makes it harder.
Yes.
And that's part of what's interesting about comedy because there's the paradox of like what is true and what's not true or whatever. But it does make it harder because you're just saying like, you're not saying this movie is bad. You're saying Dave Chappelle is bad. And that is different. And here's different. And it's because both sides are actually saying that. Like, I think because people do not view a piece of comedy as separate from the person, right? It's like,
yeah, sure, you're using your name. You're not an actor.
Yeah. So I've been critical of this Dave Chappelle special, and I was like, yeah, they were like, yeah, but Dave Chappelle's a legend. I was like, yeah, legends make bad stuff all the time.
All the time.
What are we supposed to not like?
Not every Rolling Stones album is good.
And it's not like when someone criticized that like Paul McCartney was like, how dare you criticize the Rolling Stones? It's sort of like, but that's because I'm saying, like, right now, it's like, oh, Dave Chappelle is like being lazy. It's like, yeah, but he created this work. It's like, yeah, but this special is a separate thing created by a person. It's just sort of, it's because we associate everyone with these people that it becomes more mixed up. I think also because when comedians get successful, they get worse. And that is also hard, is that like, they just are worse. Once you get to a point where you're selling 5,000 tickets in a city, you are now worse. I don't know what happened. You're sort of worse. It happens to everybody. By the time you're that level, like 3,000 tickets, you can be as good as you ever been. You're probably going to be better than you ever been. But that jump, those 2,000 new people in the city are not your fans. They're ruining your comedy.
That's funny. That's interesting. So I'll give you my opinion about the Chappelle special. Actually, I'm watching Bill Burr's Paper Tiger tonight. I haven't seen it yet.
So it's a useful contrast, which is like, spoiler, it's great, right? It's so good. And I saw it. I'm like, thank God someone put out a special this good, because it'll allow us to recalibrate the conversation and be like, this is what good looks like.
Yes.
And a person who's pushing boundaries. And now we all realize, oh, maybe we were wrong. But the problem was that is not how the conversation has played out. It's insane, which is people have lauded this special, including our critic wrote a rave of this special, but said like the first 4 minutes are unnecessary. He just sort of like lists things and he goes like triggered and all those words. And then he just moves on and he says some like edgy stuff and
you're talking about Bill Burr's special. Okay.
But it's incredible. And the point is you need him to be he justifies why comedians are sort of angry or come off as hateful in the beginning by showing that it's all built on these things. It's a whole piece. It's thoughtful. It's considered. It shows what good is and shows how unconsidered Dave Chappelle's was.
Yeah.
But everyone, I'll finish in a note.
Okay.
Which is, we wrote a review that said it's positive except for the first few minutes, first 2-3 minutes or unnecessary. It is just winking at a certain audience. And we're like, that's bad. And in the last 2 weeks since we wrote the review, the critic who wrote that has been getting very violent types of threats on Twitter. How dare you criticize Bill Burr? You're this word, you're that word. Washington Post wrote an op-ed. Someone wrote an op-ed being like, criticizing the critique of the first 4 minutes.
Now the critique, what's great is the critiques of the critiques of the specials are now being critiqued.
Yes. So like he critiqued this and it's like, how dare you like Bill Burr's special, not Dave Chappelle? And that's when I was like, and then people lump in also the Shane Gillis stuff, which is like comedians allowed to say whatever they want. It's like, he was talking on a podcast and he was literally being racist. It's not like and these are all different things. And it's because people
are lazy,
and they're just like, people are lazy and they're lazy when thinking of comedy because they're like, all comedians, like what comedians do is this. And you're like, well, no, it's a wide spectrum of things. And that's the main point I'm trying to make, which is like, we need people to be able to see something and know it's bad and not morally bad, but like actually like.
Yeah, but this is difficult.
Yes.
Because you're an expert.
Yeah.
You're an art expert. You know what I mean? And this is always the case when it comes to art, as the difference between the people who are at the forefront and the masses. And also, this is art and entertainment lumped into one. Yeah. Right? So the music analogy fits there, right? So like pop music is fun, even if it's not cutting edge art.
Yeah, definitely.
So I watched Bill Burr's special, not with a terribly critical eye, to be honest. I just watched it because. No, excuse me, Dave Chappelle special. I watched it mostly just as someone who was just trying to consume some comedy. Yeah. Frankly, I'm not watching much stand-up comedy anymore. I'm over it.
Got it.
And also, it also is not fun the way it used to be because I'm analyzing it. I'm just like, oh, I see what you're doing there. Like,
oh, interesting. I'm still able to enjoy the things that I enjoy.
That's great.
It's like, it truly is the greatest thing about my life is that like when people are good and really doing it, I can go to shows and be like lost in it.
I think that that's the case. The problem is that's only 5 or 10% of the time.
I can't enjoy not good comedy.
That's exactly right. So as a result, I watch improv.
Yeah.
Because I'm not deconstructing it. Yeah. I can just be present and just laugh and enjoy myself. In any case, so I watched the Anthony Jeselnik special. I get a kick out of that guy.
Yes.
You know, I like how committed he is to his style.
Yes.
And I like the character that he plays.
Sure.
You know, it's well done.
And it's a character, and it's well written as a character.
Yeah.
Like it's a well developed, thought through thing, and he's thinking about how he writes it like a writer. He went to school. He wanted to be a writer. He wanted to be Bret Easton Ellis or whatever. And he essentially created an American Psycho character.
It's great.
And it evolves. Like if you've seen him recently, it's like a different person.
Well, I've only seen him recently. He was off my radar.
I meant like the stuff he's doing now, the way he tells stories now. And it's very interesting how the paradox of who's Anthony, who's this Anthony and all that stuff. It's really interesting.
So what's interesting is
special.
I watched the special. By the end of it, I'm predicting his punchlines.
Yeah.
Because, you know what I mean? Like he has a formula, a way that he goes about creating these situations. I'm not critiquing. I think the average person would never do that. It's just here I am sitting in my living room looking for the reversal.
Yeah. I mean, he also takes big pauses. It's like literally he plays a game to see, can you just think of it's like he wants you to almost get there and then say something. Like he doesn't want to give you, and it's a very odd thing to do. It's like a bit like, I imagine like a horror villain of like you trying to play with the audience.
Well, most comedians, there's this myth of the pause.
Yeah.
Right. There's this myth of setup, pause, punchline. It's setup, punchline.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's research on this. There's no pauses.
Yeah.
You know, so he's the exception that proves the rule.
Tig does that too. Tig takes big pauses. That's just because of speech patterns.
I see.
But she is almost all pauses. But nonetheless, I was just thinking about she talked the slow talk in like Ron Funches. All slow talking comedians I find very interesting.
They have pauses because they just have pauses.
Kind of, yeah. And then because people liked it, right? It's not like they're like, I'm going to be a pausing person. It's just sort of they were, and that's what people liked about them. So they didn't force themselves to speed it up.
I see. I agree with you. I like the intent of what Chappelle was doing. And because he's a legend, he can get away with it. Like, it reminds me a little bit of these, like, you know, back in the day, there's these stories of Bill Cosby doing like 2.5 hours.
Sure.
And part of that is just Bill Cosby was just, not only was he incredibly talented, he had this likability factor and he was a legend. You know what I mean? Like, and people were willing to suffer through it. I'm not sure suffer is the right word, but you know, they're willing to give him that break, you know, in that way. I agree. I was like, dude, you needed 6 more months on this. You know what I mean? But I think he was hustling because of the timing.
Yeah, I mean, again,
because he can. Like, it's very Kanye of him.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little bit of a middle finger.
Yeah, I mean, comedians I talked to about it before it came out, before they knew it was coming out, they'd seen him on Broadway or whatever, and they're like, well, it's not done. I mean, I find it
was not done.
You're allowed to do this. I'm like, on a live stage, you can do whatever you want. But when you charge people a lot of money, when he did Broadway, you're charging people $500 and doing that, then you're just making people pay to see you. You're doing your Bob Dylan's Endless Tour. You're basically being like, this is not going to be a good show. You're going to be in the same room as Bob Dylan. I grew up loving Michael Jordan. The only time I've ever seen him play, he scored 8 points as one of the worst games he ever played. When he was in the Washington Wizards, but I paid because I wanted to be in his presence. Dave Chappelle is doing a comedy version of it, and if he then didn't release these specials and then didn't have and get suck up so much, if he wasn't the only comedian anyone knew, like so many people just know Dave Chappelle is good.
Yeah.
What happens is when people don't know what good is, they get a sense based on how other people talk about it, and people are like, Dave Chappelle's the best, but no one explains what that means. So then everyone's like, well, I laughed at this. I know it's good because I've been told. So then this is what good is.
Right.
And then whatever he does calibrates what good is for people. And when he is not good, it undercuts the entire thing I'm trying to do, which is to explain that comedy is good.
Okay, but here, let me counter though.
Sure.
So I agree with you that it was too early, but I'm not sure it was bad.
Yeah.
And the reason is people loved it.
Sure.
Right. And so then what's the currency? And so in the sense of, so I'll juxtapose this with Hannah Gatsby's Nanette.
Mm-hmm.
So Nanette was dialed in, but Nanette was willing to, in Nanette, Hannah was willing to forego laughs to make a point.
Sure.
The argument is Chappelle was willing to forego laughs to make a point. And that point resonated with people. And so I get the fact that the critics panned it.
Yeah.
And then the audience loved it. Or a particular audience loved it. I want to, we've talked a lot about other people.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about you for a little while.
Sure. That's my interview technique.
So
every time I guess on something, I'm like, oh, let's avoid talking about me. But I'm happy to talk about me.
So your name is Jessie David Fox.
Yes.
Not Jessie Fox.
Yeah. Why?
So I'm Albert Peter McGraw, but I'm
Peter McGraw.
Not Albert Peter McGraw. I'm Peter McGraw.
That's more interesting to me because you decided not to use the name you were called your entire life.
No, my family has a weird tradition where the firstborn male is Albert Peter, but goes by Peter or Pete or something. So
it's an odd tradition, but
it's an odd tradition. I think it's a Southern thing.
Yeah.
But I could have. So I'm a state school guy.
Yeah.
I have friends who went to Ivy League schools, my fellow academics who make fun of me for being a state school guy.
Yeah.
And Peter McGraw is a state school guy. Mm-hmm. Albert Peter McGraw is an Ivy League guy. But you're a state school guy. Yes. But you sound like an Ivy League guy.
Oh, I appreciate it. What, with the name?
Yeah. So is that...
I mean, it was a bit of... This was a decision I made when I was pretty early on. So in San Francisco when I was deciding to start pitch places. And I was going by Jessie Fox. And... it's a pretty common name.
Okay. There's some actor or something, or musician or something.
And there's a professor at Ohio State who's a woman who spells her name Jessie without an I, which is traditionally the boy way of spelling it, who is a professor who I believe is somewhat in media, so she gets interviewed a lot.
I see.
And it was a thing of, I was starting out, and I guess I was like, first thing I was like, there's these other Jessies.
Okay. Does
it make me more Googleable? Which it really was just like that. And it did. And then I wrestled with the idea of like, it is a more pretentious sounding name.
Mm-hmm. By the way, for the audience, Jessie is sitting across from me in a Brooklyn Nets ball cap, a t-shirt. Are you in shorts?
I am in shorts. This is a very rare look. This is so funny that
I was expecting you to show up in an ascot.
Oh, no. That's so funny. I dress. It's really funny that you notice it because I never dress this way, and I showed up to meet a friend Wednesday dressed like this, and then she joked that I was dressed this way because this is how I dress to go on a plane or whatever.
Okay,
because I'm flying later today, or when I flew in. I usually dress in the exact same way every day, which is a long sleeve Oxford shirt, like a fitted slack, and then sneakers or whatever.
Okay.
I don't dress fancier than that or less fancy. I just sort of a neutral.
You have a uniform.
Kind of. I just sort of think it's like the aesthetic that work. Mm-hmm. So this is not. I will wear a hat I get haircuts every 2 months, and about 6 weeks in, the haircut is not good anymore. But it takes me 2 weeks to remember to book the haircut. So I'm currently in that phase. So my hair is just sort of not good. So
take your hat off for.
Well, now it's terrible because my hair's going to be flat.
Okay.
It's
all right.
Very flat. So I could get into that more, but I don't think that's going to be interesting to these people. But it was so I didn't pick the name to be more pretentious, but I did know when I did it was, and I had a roommate at the time who I asked about it. She's like, you're trying to be a writer. It's not crazy to seem more pretentious than you are. And that was sort of, I was like, that makes sense. And I like the sound of it. I do think the sound's good.
It rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. So then I was just like, okay. So I told people, and that's sort of it. Like,
my point is, it sounds like, Jessie David Fox went to Harvard. Jessie Fox went to Maryland.
I have a real chip on my shoulder about when I got into journalism proper. And I started working New York Magazine, and I was surrounded by these people that went to those schools.
Yeah.
And even when I worked at William Morris, I was surrounded by people that went to those schools. And so I try to write a bit knowing that I am a person of that background, I guess. Like I majored in psychology. I didn't major in journalism or writing and I take all that into be like representing sort of that point of view. And it's, I think of myself as clever. I don't necessarily think of myself as like intelligent, and that I want my writing to reflect that. So there was a while that I felt my writing became too academic, just because I'm a heady guy, and because I'm not fussy about language that I need things to be dense or long. I was able to write complicated subjects in ways in which people understood, and that's why I was able to have a career as a writer. But I did not like being that way. Okay. I was like, I didn't feel like that represented who I was, and I tried to be the person who went to that state school and be like a clever person who's made it, not trying to pretend I am like the smartest person.
Yeah, you're the Chicago style comic, not the Harvard Lampoon style.
No, but like I do understand I have glasses or whatever, and people might think me in certain ways. But and the podcast, I tried to avoid it seeming academic. I tried it to seem human, and that is an intentional attempt. I have this perspective and understanding of how comedy works, but the goal is not for people to hear that by me talking. Like you want to guide the conversation. Yes, and I want, if it seems like I know how comedy works because of the questions I asked to the guest, sure, but it really is about understanding this person and knowing how comedy works enough to understand this person, but and having the conversation reflect how much they understand how comedy works. Like it might be instinctual, and okay, well then let's capture that, right? It's like, I don't know, Sinbad doesn't write jokes. Sinbad is Sinbad. He talks for 3 hours and it's incredible. So capture that. Don't be like, what was it like to think of this sentence? Because he's not that. He's just like, you're trying to capture those people. I'll ask certain people, like, you use callbacks. Callbacks are sort of old fashioned and blah, blah, blah. And then we will talk about that. And sometimes I'll like tell the editor to cut out the part where I'm talking a lot, because it really is not about me seeming smart. When I first started so this is my first ever podcast. I'm gonna, I think, wind it down soon. Oh, so interesting. This will be episode, I don't know, 76, 77 or so. I've always sort of said I'll do 100 and then reassess. Sure. It's been a good learning experience, and I did it mostly to seed ideas for this book project rather than to build a huge following. So I've been successful. Yeah. I kind of got into a situation where I realize like there's a perfect ratio for the percentage of time my guest speaks to me speaking. It sounds like you're on the high end of that ratio. Like to me, when it's 90-10, it feels too much like an interview. Yeah. But if it's 60-40, I feel like I'm cheating my audience out of an opportunity to hear someone special. Yeah. Right. And so, I think like 70-30 is probably like the sweet spot for me in this podcast. But I actually wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience doing a podcast. Yeah. I can't claim that I'm doing this one well. It's competent. Yeah. Right. Kind of thing. Like I have a secret project I'm working on that will be launched as a podcast. And that podcast is going to be designed to see if I can garner an audience. Yeah. But I don't have like huge resources. Like, let's be honest, like the very best, most popular podcasts have usually two things going for it. At least one of them. One is a big name. Yeah. Right. An already established brand. And the other one is a team. Yeah. A level of professionalism that makes it go. Sure. These networks that help grow it.
Yes.
Most of the best marketing for podcasts is advertisements on other podcasts.
Yes.
And usually that's trades. People trade those things.
I see.
That's a podcast industry secret. People swap
Yeah, I'll have you on. You'll have me on.
Yeah, or they'll be like, just do an ad for my podcast. They'll do an ad for your podcast.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I don't do ads.
Yeah.
But in any case. So I'm curious, though, as I'm contemplating this next podcast, it'll be a sit down with one or two people kind of thing. Anything that I should be thinking about? Like, what has it been that has worked well for you? What are the problems that you've established? What advice do you have? It's a big open-ended question.
Yeah.
So do what you want with it.
Yeah. I want to think about what I would tell people.
No, tell me.
Tell you. Sorry. Tell people. And
we don't need more podcasts.
Yeah.
We just need my new one.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was what conversation is lacking. Like what my podcast was partly started out of, I had listened to comedy podcasts my entire life. The entire life of comedy podcasts.
Sure.
I've been pretty up on it. The first column I wrote for Splitsider was reviewing comedy podcasts.
Okay.
The first comedian I interviewed was Scott Aukerman, with the co-creator of Earwolf. So I've been a follower of the industry. And I'd heard a lot of interviews and a lot of shows, and I felt like certain things were not. There were conversations that would start and they would drop about how people write and stuff like that. And I found it fascinating and special. Like, it felt like it was an insight into a person that was actually being jumped over because other comedians get it already.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, you write on stage? I write on stage. And then they move on, right?
Yeah, I felt this way when I first started studying humor. I watched the movie Comedian with Jerry Seinfeld and Orny Adams. Yeah. And it was like blinders coming off.
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah, and so I think, but other comedians, Jerry was, I've said this, like, I interviewed Jerry Seinfeld, and I asked him questions about jokes or something in this interview, and he goes, it's my favorite, it was in public, so it was in front of other people, it was at Vulture Festival 2015, and he goes, this is my favorite thing to talk about, but it's so boring to these people. This is one of the most famous people on Earth's favorite thing to talk about.
Right.
And he said it's boring. That is impossible. Like, yeah, maybe talking about cars might be boring to people who don't like you because of cars, but you are a comedian.
Yes.
So I felt like there was something missing in that alone, right? It's like, it's not like what is not missing is like comedians chatting with each other.
Yes, of course.
And it's good. Like, if you like the host and how they chat, and then it's like, well, it's nice to hear and meet other comedians. So that was missing, and I knew it was missing. And then I also felt it was really hard for people to know how to get into new comedians. Because there's no way of doing it justice. And there are these people that I'd be like, this is what great is. And it's like, how do I tell a person who only watches 2 specials a year that like Jen Kirkman is better than those people?
Yes.
Because they'll be like, they have whatever biases they have. And so there's
also this legacy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's like, you're like, a lot of people only have room in their heart for like 3 comedians. You're going to tell me that there's like all 1,000 that are brilliant and they don't know any of them because they're more specific. And, so all that combined, and so the main advice is like, make sure what you're offering does not exist somewhere else. And being able to articulate what that difference is. And for me, it was beyond those topics. It was a feeling that no comedian has been interviewed well. Really. Like, I felt...
Thank you for that.
What do you mean?
This
like,
is
no, but I meant like...
I'm not... Yeah, no, there's no offense taken.
I felt, and this was, to be fair, your podcast didn't exist when I started my podcast. But I felt...
I'm not, by the way, I don't claim that I do this well.
Yeah. So now I double didn't insult you. But I felt no comedian really was interviewed well. I think so the gold standard was Mark Maron. Yeah, and he's not really interviewing people because you had comedians who are not interviewers, right? And so they do okay, and you get a sense of who a person is, right?
Yeah.
Because Mark sort of is open and he's interested, but so you get a sense of who they are as people in an interesting way, and you learn what their parents did for a living, because he's obsessed with that. But it's kind of, that's what his goal is. And I think the problem also with that show, a show that was very important to me and seminal in my understanding of comedy, the problem was also that the show was built around Mark's understanding of the person, and sometimes he was wrong.
I see.
So there's examples that I won't name of people he was kind of really insulting to because he did not know who they were and didn't prepare to know who they were.
So I was on WTF and I had one of those experiences. Yeah. So
I was like, and no journalist who's interviewed a comedian really understands how comedy works.
Yeah.
They only understand how to use comedians to talk about things they want them to talk about.
I get it.
Because comedians are good at talking.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know how comedy works, but I'm an interviewer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to bring a sort of thoughtfulness to an interview to a comedian that honestly my experience has not existed. And that was the real thing that I was like, that doesn't exist. And hopefully there's people who like comedy.
Yeah. So I teach marketing to MBA students, the intro class, and you're basically giving a lesson in this idea of creating value that's differentiated.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea is this is the only place you can get this thing.
Yeah.
And you will be successful if people want that thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then now, as time goes on, the success is partly in my ability to be good. Like, really, like the show being good is probably the best marketing at this point, where it's like the first, I don't know, X amount of listeners. It's like comedy fans who felt like they're missing out on this.
Mm-hmm.
But now, and this was always my goal, which was like, I want to talk to artists about making art. However, comedians are better at talking than any other artists because they talk for a living.
Yes.
And that's the show. Like, I would talk to photographers, but you wouldn't be able to see the work because it's an audio medium, and photographers aren't great at talking because they see visual stuff.
Yeah, it's like the DVD specials for when they talk to the director.
Yeah.
You know, they show you watch the movie and then, you know, the director talks over it. That works great because these are incredibly smart, articulate people, but it only works because you're watching the movie at the same time. Yeah.
It's hard to, and that is the thing of the joke allows, because comedians had such a hard time talking about process because they would the only time they'd be asked about it, they would get the broadest question of like, how do you do it?
Yes.
Where do your ideas come from? How do you get jokes? And they're like, they'll give a broad answer. Well, I give an incredibly specific question, and I don't even get to the writing until like 10 minutes into the interview.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what, if a joke's about ice cream, this is a fake example, what was your experience to ice cream as a kid? Like, tell me all of it. Or like, Anthony Jeselnik told a joke about dropping babies. I was like, you wrote this joke in your late 30s. What is your relationship to having kids?
Yes.
That goes into this joke. This joke is not Anthony Jeselnik's joke about having kids. He doesn't go, I decided I don't want to have kids or whatever. But that joke is his joke about being in his late 30s and being around kids and realizing he does not feel normal around them.
Yes.
It's not what you think the joke's about.
Right.
Because that's not what the text of the joke about is at all, but it's clearly he's a person.
He's communicating a belief about the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's like, let's fill out this picture and be like, it's a bit of, I use an iceberg metaphor a lot, which is like, you see this joke and it's like, actually there's a lot of stuff going on beyond just sort of how the joke was written. It's like, who was this person that led into this?
Yeah.
Why are they the person that did this joke at this time?
Yes. Okay. I need to curate a little bit, but I will offer one person who, in terms of interviewing comedians, who seems to do it well, and that's Howard Stern.
Yeah.
And I think in part because Howard, is a humorist, and then he's also just an expert interviewer. Yeah. And so he seems to have, of course, he's not doing it on a podcast. Yeah. So he's but excluded from this.
And he uses the weight of it being him to force people to answer questions.
Yeah. He has an incredible ability to get people to open up and talk about things that they wouldn't to anyone else. That's stunning. So I knew about your podcast. However, a number of people reached out to me about your Gilbert Gottfried.
Oh, really?
Episode, because in that episode you preface. You do a little intro and you give a little primer on the benign violation theory and arguing or contending that it was important to sort of understand this because of the nature of the aristocrat's joke and so on. Kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't usually do a big intro because I think I do a good job in an interview giving context to things already. And I do think...
also, no one wants a big intro.
Yeah, I mean, the first joke about podcasts was that Mark Maron's intros were too long.
Yes.
That's the thing. So I try to like convey that I think this person is great and a little bit about why, and sometimes use the intro to get at something I couldn't get in the interview because I'll leave the interviews and be disappointed I didn't mention something. So I will bring it up kind of as a way of framing everything.
I see.
Like I really regretted not asking Anthony Jeselnik when I was interviewing him if he was in the persona while we were talking. Like, because it was live. And like, so what I did in the interview goes like, pay attention to what feels like him and what feels like not him.
Yeah, so that's nice.
So like that, so that's what I try to do, like little small things of like seeding things.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew I played that Gilbert Gottfried joke for one or two people. And it's a really harsh version of that joke. And I had,
so for the audience, if you're not familiar, there's this joke. It's a comedian's joke, anti-joke.
Yes.
Called The Aristocrats. There's Paul Provenza has a really fun documentary about it. In the documentary, he interviews comics about it. They tell their versions of the joke. As the documentary goes on, the joke gets more and more foul. It's incredibly offensive. It features incest and bestiality and any number of things that are off-putting.
And had seen the documentary.
And Gilbert Gottfried has one of the most outrageous versions of this.
And has a famous version where he did it at the Hugh Hefner roast right after 9/11 because he had this 9/11 joke that bombed. And
he just launches into the aristocrat. Joke.
But I'd seen that documentary and I'd heard versions, but they all sort of are 5 minutes long. So they kind of like hit the beats. And it is a bit of the problem with aristocrats is they sort of like this beat, then this beat, then this beat, and now they're doing this, and then it sort of ends. But this is the joke we play is a version that's about 11 minutes long, maybe. And it really is incredible how it encompasses all of who Gilbert. It's every impression he does goes into it, but it really is really gross. Like it actually is disgusting. And it's not just like, oh, people have incest, because it's like a fake benign thing when you just say incest at this point, when you know the context of the joke. You know, rats, there's these rats and they're like put inside of people and there's blood. It's really so gross. And I had played it for people. And it's not just language. It's like, it actually is violent. And I was like, if people don't know the context of this, it might turn them off. Or just have them be like, this is nothing. Like, this is like, and so I wanted to soften it. I essentially, which I think I said in the intro, which is like, the whole idea of the aristocrats and roast in general is essentially creating context, right?
Yes.
And
what makes that joke funny is to understand the joke, the nature of the joke, the history of the joke, the other versions of it.
And it's like, and it's a context that's saying, this is a joke where we say offensive things.
Yes.
So
you have license.
Yes. So you know that if I'm saying it, I'm saying it's bad. Right? That's like the whole premise of it is that it allows, and comedians can do this on their own in their own jokes, but it's sometimes challenging and some comedians are better at it than others, but it's essentially like a sort of like definitive example of having a clear violation and trying to make it benign as possible. And I felt even people who knew that context would still not find it benign enough because to then listen to an interview. Like, it was a bit of like, if you're at a comedy club and you hear that version, you've seen that he closes with it, so you've seen other stuff, you know the context, you're drinking, whatever. But like, if you're going to work, you need it to be a bit more benign if you are then going to have to sit through an hour of me taking him seriously.
Yes.
And that is something I had learned from doing the podcast a while, because I had David Cross on and he had a joke which he says the N-word because he's of a belief system that like, if you don't say it, then you're letting, if you're doing a racist character and you have him say the N-word, like actually say the phrase the N-word, that's a lie. You're letting them off the hook because no racist person says it.
Yes.
And I did a bad job of not explaining that to a person who doesn't understand that context to it.
Yes.
So that turned people off if you didn't know that until after you heard him kind of answer why he says it.
So this intro
So I then actually, I believe, edited that intro to sort of add more context.
To immunize people.
So this was an attempt of like, I know that a lot of people aren't going to like this because why would you? Like,
yeah, if you're a normal person, you're going to be put off.
But even like I was put off. Like even like I am not offended by anything, but I do find things gross.
Yes,
and it's gross. So I wanted to be like, hey, what you're about to hear is gross. It's important to maybe listen to the joke because we will talk about it. But like, so that explaining the benign violation theory, which I think holds for a lot of different types of comedy, it just sort of it makes people feel a little bit more comfortable for things like that. I think the example I always use for benign violation that I like to show that there's a range is Stella. They would wear suits but then be stupid, and it's just like the smallest amount of a violation of like people wear suits are smart, they're stupid. That's a violation. It's benign because who cares? Like that to me is just as a smaller use of how I think of benign violation of not just violation means comedians must push boundaries, but violation could be this isn't funny. You shouldn't say it again. You keep on saying it over and over again. And then there's a lot of things that could be violating of what a norm is.
Yeah. It's like the joke, like, you say, right. You say something the second time you say it's not funny, but the 1000th time, like there's these jokes that play on that kind
Christian
of stuff.
Jal is a horse. Yes.
That's right.
The example that a lot of people.
That's right.
Or like, why the chicken crossed the road to get the other side. That you're expecting a punchline to violate that is by not having a punchline is a violation, but it is benign. And then like by the way, why did the chicken cross the road to get to the other side? The first time you ever heard that, it was funny. Yeah, I think it is funny. I mean,
it's not funny anymore, but it was funny the first time.
If you stop for a second, it's pretty funny. But
can I tell a little story about the benign violation theory?
Sure, please.
Of course, it's my podcast. So the real heavy lifting for this idea was done by a linguist named Tom Veitch. He wrote a paper, published it in an obscure niche journal called Humor. Yeah. And he called it the N+V theory. Yeah. So I'm better at naming things. Yeah. Caleb Warren. And I think actually Caleb, my co-author and collaborator on almost all of this work, I think did most of the heavy lifting on naming this thing. I was actually for a long time, I wanted to call it benign threats. Yeah. That didn't work though. So in any case, the story that Veitch tells is that he heard a joke and he said he laughed for like a day. Yeah. And then he had to figure out why it was funny. And it's actually a version of why did the chicken cross the road? Yeah. It's why did the monkey fall out of the tree? Why? Because it's dead. Yeah. Right. So, or died or something like that. Yeah. In any case, it's really fascinating to me. And maybe this is just chance. Yeah. So I was working on an idea with a faculty member at USC. And I remember him saying that like something that he was doing took like 10 years to catch on. Mm-hmm. And, he's a senior scholar. Yeah. I'm a mid-career guy. And I remember thinking like, that seems strange to me. Like I'm used to the immediate of you publish something, there's a bunch of media, and that's where it feels like it's on. Yeah. But his thing is, no, these things are slow burns. Like, if they're going to make it out into the world, it's going to take a long time to do it. So our first paper came out in 2010. So we're 9 years in. Yeah. I taped.
Good timing. That was the beginning of the comedy boom. The comedy boom started in 2009.
Better to be lucky than good. Yeah. So I did a TEDx talk in 2010 also. And, so seeded this idea, then a bunch of stuff. So in the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, your Gilbert Gottfried thing hit my Twitter feed or my inbox. Yeah. Pete Holmes. Yeah.
Pete Holmes talks about a lot.
Talks about the benign. I've met Pete Holmes and we had a panel where it all came up and so on, talking about it at some festival or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then this is the best one. I have this favorite coffee shop here in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. It's an old school coffee shop. I go on the weekends in the morning to try to write. And I was there with a friend and I tap her on the shoulder and I go, listen to that conversation over there. She's like, what? And listen, it's these two guys And I had heard incongruity.
Yeah.
So that's all I heard was incongruity. I was like, I wonder if they're talking about humor. Yeah. And the one guy saying, and also there are these two white guys talking loudly. Mm. Yeah. I'm sure they're mansplaining, manspreading. They're doing all the things that are hateable about straight white guys these days. Sure. And one of the guys is like, well, really, my preferred explanation is the benign violation theory. Yeah. And my friend looks at me. She goes, "Are you kidding me?" Yeah. And I was like, no. I'm like, I've never had this happen. You know what I mean? Yeah. I feel like it. I could be wrong, but I feel like it's catching in a way that I didn't anticipate when I started doing the work.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is people interested in comedy now, like interested in it. Mm-hmm. That's part of all of this is people value comedians more now than they did in the past. And they
also hate them more now.
Yeah, because we expect so much from them and we don't know how we value. The problem is we value them, but we have, I think there's the problem as I go back to literacy is like we value them incorrectly.
I see.
So we only because Jon Stewart ruined sort of everything, which is sort of like, Jon Stewart, comedy is important. And then it's like, then it was Louis.
And then he's like, peace out.
Right. And I think like Louis was then sort of the next comedian we took very seriously. And then, I just think there's something wrong about the translation of how we took these people seriously. But, there's more seemingly more people are teaching college courses about comedy. My podcast can exist.
Yeah,
right?
it is. I will say this. When I started doing this work, when Caleb and I started doing this work, I did my homework. Yeah. I looked at the resources out there. What is the conversation happening? And it wasn't happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. It's just sort of, it literally, you were there. That was right when the conversation started. I mean, essentially like podcasts is when the conversation started happening. So podcast started in 2009, really. WTF, I think, started at the end of 2009. Comedy Death Ray / Comedy Bang Bang started in 2009. That was what most people call the first wave, which is actually the second wave because there was like the Ricky Gervaises and all of those.
I see.
But like 2009 was the first. Everyone's writing stories about WTF and like, these comedians are interesting or whatever. And so, but generations of new comedy podcasts and people taking comedy seriously. And I think, my career and Jason and us trying to find more people like meet me and want to be comedy journalist, which is not a career that existed in 2010.
Yeah, I know your peers. I've had two of them on. Yeah. I've had Jason Zinnemann on and I had Julie Seaball on. Yeah. And then I also know John Wenzel. Yeah. I haven't had a chance to have
but there's
a few of you folks out there.
But compared to for how big the industry is, it's like it's not that many. And still not that, considering that Jason started that column like 2011, 2010, something like that. The fact that he started in 2011 and that there hasn't been tons more comedy critics in America since is actually kind of crazy. Like you would think
the New York Times would lead the way.
Yeah. And that other publications, the closest is like, I know people at the New Yorker, if you're into comedy, like, that might be useful. Like they understand to have people write about comedy. Mm-hmm. But it's not anyone's main job. The person that has written a bunch of comedy pieces is now a theater critic at the New Yorker, but I actually think is a very good writer about comedy. It's just sort of not for a place like the New Yorker, their readers, they have to have a theater critic.
Yes, of course.
And where I believe in England, there is actually like a pretty rich culture of comedy criticism. I just sort of don't, but because it's born out of theater criticism. Yeah. So I think I think it's starting and hopefully will it increase? Like my goal is that there is like a bunch and every publication has it and people are pitching unique story ideas. Uh-huh. And I had a point to say about comedy criticism. I can't remember. The hard part is also some comedians still don't believe comedy should be analyzed at all.
Yes. So how convenient.
Yeah. So it's right. It's like, we're above it. We're the only art form that can't be understood.
How convenient. I mean, yeah, of course.
But I think you have a new generation who grew up caring about comedy. And so like the Pete Holmes generation I wrote a piece about how the most important comedian was Jerry Seinfeld, the character on Seinfeld.
I see.
He was the most popular comedian of the 90s. this fake guy, because he, to a zillion people, were like, comedians have day-to-day lives where they're kind of funny,
yes.
right? And that funniness goes into their material. That's the fundamental premise of what Seinfeld was. That all this other stuff happened was that this guy's material comes from the fact that he lives this crazy life. Tons of people watch that and were like, "Oh, comedy is a thing that exists." And then Comedian, the documentary, comes out, which was a huge influence on Pete and on Anthony.
Yeah, it had a big effect on me too.
So that is, hopefully, my hope is that we're not in a boom that will bust, but we're actually, because of the first boom, we have a bunch of people who do like comedy, and hopefully we take comedy seriously, and that your theory will be part of the lexicon of how people understand it, right? It's like, because it's a theory that...
Will you call my dean and tell her that?
Because ultimately, your theory makes things more benign in of itself, right? If it's like, right now, X comedian has a joke about X touchy subject.
Yes.
Your theory... and their hope is they're able to make it seem benign by a variety of ways.
Yes.
Like for some people who, let's say you're...
just knowing that they're trying to craft a joke.
Yes.
Already.
And that there's a theory that explains why something would be a violation.
Yeah.
I think that is the thing that will be really helpful, which is like what Dave Chappelle is doing with the trans stuff is that he's creating a violation.
Yeah.
And then he's trying to make it benign.
Yes.
The hard part is how it is not as benign to everybody.
Yes.
And I think that is, hopefully people will be like, oh, to like some trans people, this is not benign. To other trans people,
it's hilarious.
It is benign.
Yes, right.
But you have to be like, just because one trans person thinks it's benign does not mean 1,000 think it's not are wrong.
Yes. I would say when someone says that's not funny,
yes,
you can't say
that doesn't exist.
That's not funny to me. I like to say, people say, "Oh, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is not funny." I'm like, dude, they're in their 14th season. Yeah. That show is funny to the people who find it funny.
But I'm always I sort of funny is how do I put it? I avoid the word funny. I don't like the word funny. It's not useful for my purposes because ultimately comedy is subjective.
Yes.
As I like to say, all art is subjective. Well, comedy is very subjective.
I see.
And if we're just going, well, it's funny, these people laugh. It's like, well, this comedian you disrespect sold out a football stadium.
There you go.
So are you saying that
I just threw my hands up in the air, by the way.
The only standard is the amount of people that laugh, right? That's not how we judge any other art, just by the amount of people who get to do it. Right. And so, yes, it's once we accept that every comedian is funny to certain groups of people, and that is not how we're judging comedy anymore. We're not going to judge people on how funny they are or not, because that is subjective. We're not going to judge comedy about what they're talking about. Okay. And instead are able to analyze craft or whatever just a little bit. I understand there's a value to both those other types of criticism. There's a value to arguing about what they're talking about, and there's a value to saying if someone's funny or not, because if you believe in my taste, then you want to know what I find funny because you think you'll find it funny.
Yes.
But we also need to be like, oh, that's not interesting. The way it's a thing to start trying to get people to think about.
I get it. It's when you're suggesting you go back to the music stuff. There's the Billboard Top 100. Yeah. That's one way that you can judge music, and then the other one is you can look at it as an art form and who's doing cutting edge work. And
who's self-inspired and who's actually doing something that is original.
Yes, is new.
But not just original, like being original alone is not the only thing, right? Like who actually has something underneath it that is making it work.
Yeah.
And sometimes things are just sort of mysterious. But I think
they're not as mysterious. The thing is, they're not as mysterious as people want them to be.
Yeah.
And my thing about this is like to try to claim that comedy is so mysterious and magical that science can't figure it out.
Yeah. Well,
one
it's also
is giving too much credit to comedy and not enough credit to science. If you think about what scientists have been able to do. So I want you to be subjective for a moment.
Okay.
And so normally I ask people to tell me what they're reading, watching, or listening to that's really good. Mm-hmm. But what I would like you to do is to tell me 3 episodes of your podcast that you would suggest people listen to, independent of the Gilbert Gottfried one, since we already talked about it, or the Jerry Seinfeld one.
Okay.
So 3 from good one.
Sure. I thought you were going to ask me who my favorite comedians were.
No, I don't. I get asked that question all the time. And
It's something that I only thought that because I had recently decided. I was like, when people ask, I'm going to say Christian Shaw's my favorite comedian.
Okay.
And I just like, it's true, and I didn't think about it until recently. Nonetheless.
Okay.
So,
you know what? I should do that because I get asked that question all the time, and I just bumble my way
pick somebody
through
and think about what it means. And I was like, and this is the standard. I will answer your question, I promise. I am stalling a little bit, but it is useful, which is if you're at a comedy show, and I know you don't see that much stand-up, but let's say you're at a stand-up show.
No, I do. I do see stand-up. I'm just sort of over it.
Got it.
Yeah.
So let's say they're like, we have a surprise guest, so you don't know who it's going to be. Who would you be most excited for them to say is coming up? And then that's how I was able to be like...
That's a good behavioral thing. I might say Chris Rock.
I mean, Chris Rock is, in my opinion, the best comedian. But he's not my favorite.
I get it. Like I think I'd be most excited to Chris Rock. I've
seen him enough drop in to know that it's a...
I understand it wouldn't be a good experience.
Because he's going to bomb from the next hour.
Yeah, of course. But in terms of like...
If he's going to, hey, Chris Rock's here and he's going to try hard.
Yeah, I'm going to run into someone in a green room and get a chance to chit-chat with him. It probably would be Chris Rock.
He's the short list of dream guests. It's him, Mel Brooks, and Tina Fey. So, the 3 episodes...
All right, give me one.
No, so
I'm trying to wrap this up.
Sure, I know. I'm going to do it, but I want to make sure I do a good job because hypothetically a person will then listen to me. So
I don't think anybody else can tell, but yes.
So Nikki Glazer.
Okay.
So Nikki Glazer, we talk about roast jokes.
Good.
And it really is
I listened to that episode. It's quite good.
I love that episode because it really is the iceberg metaphor of the podcast of you hear one sentence and you learn, oh, there's like so much work that went into it, so much thought that went into it. I wrote some jokes for Nikki Glazer for this current roast because she's just like, it's anyone.
Yeah,
and I was still this process at hand. She like essentially assembles a writer's room of like 70 people.
Is it that big?
It's like she'll get different amounts of emails from different amount of people, and she'll then make smaller and smaller groups. It's really interesting. And so
it's like crowdsourcing comedy.
Yeah, she knows that she wants to tell the best jokes. She doesn't care if she writes them, but ultimately they inspire her to write her own jokes anyway. She just wants to crush, and that's why she does. So there's that episode.
Wisdom of Crowds.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
What else? This season I thought was really, really
I'm going to cut you off at 2.
Danny McBride.
Okay. It's a fun one.
I think Danny McBride is one of the real people who do it right that other people in comedy respect.
I see.
And
comics.
He's not doing stand up. He's doing TV shows or whatever. And we talk about the first scene of his current show, The Righteous Gemstones. But it really is, you're talking about a person who really thinks about comedy, who really thinks about what it means to create characters and play with form in a more sitcom format. And, The Righteous Gemstone is novelistic in its approach, but it's ultimately his version of a family sitcom. And I love having that conversation. Okay, so then I want to get, I should have said the Emily Heller one. People were like, Emily Heller. I'll do a tie with the Patton Oswalt episode and the Cameron Esposito episode. It's a tie. You didn't say you're going to do a tie. Those episodes were ones where we talk about more serious things. And I think with Patton, we talked about his jokes about his wife passing away. And it really was a beautiful thing because he had done interviews around the release of the special, but he was still in it.
Yes.
Releasing the special and doing the interviews, he was still in the window of the immediate freeze. And he had no ability to sort of see outside of himself and remember anything that happened. And that interview, through the interview, you see a person talking about jokes and remembering things about.
Yeah.
And it really is compelling and a good example of sort of how the artist puts their life into their work. And then the Cameron Esposito episode, we talked about her special rape jokes and rape jokes in general. And it was a very sensitive conversation about how to talk about a thing and not re-traumatize people, and be funny, and how to use comedy and how to not use comedy, and what is the value of comedy to talk about sensitive subjects in ways that actually do help people, and while also still being funny and not minimizing sexual assault and stuff like that. And I think
the delicacy.
And the delicacy, I think it's a really interesting conversation, and it is the interview I'm most proud of because it was the most complicated interview to do.
I bet.
Because I didn't want to undermine any of it and did not want to speak for her, and I wanted to be honest to what she was trying to do as an artist. And we're talking about the joke we talk about is very small. Like it's essentially like a real joke.
Okay.
That's part of a whole hour about rape jokes.
I see.
And so it really was, it gives a spectrum of the types of things to have this, which is a very sort of serious conversation about comedy while still being respectful of comedy, to Nikki's, which is like jokes are funny.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I think this last season of the podcast was the best. I learned to have fun for the first time doing these interviews. Okay. And that helps because people...
Yeah, if you're having fun, then they're having fun.
People... I learned the thing that keeps people coming back, especially listening to episodes of comedians they haven't heard of, is how excited I am to hear answers. And that is the thing I now thinking about the tips about your podcast is people keep on listening because of the host. Yeah. They listen the first time because of the guest. But and even though I don't talk that much, they can tell that I'm really passionate about it. I will say that like what I say is preparing for the podcast, preparing for an interview, I fall in love with the person. And my goal in the interview is to convey to the audience what it is that I fell in love with them about.
Well, that's a perfect way to end this. Jessie David Fox, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
This is very fun.
All right, good.
Cool. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guests, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw next week for another fun, fascinating conversation on I'm Not Joking.